He smiled at me across the breakfast table that morning, the kind of smile that used to mean something. "Pack light, honey," he said, stirring his coffee slow. "You won't need much where we're going." At first, I thought it was his usual half-charm, half-command tone. After 35 years with Richard Turner, I'd learned that when he said something with a grin, there was always a shadow behind it. The morning light poured through the kitchen window, landing on the same oak table we bought the year we married. 35 years ago, that table had been surrounded by dreams, bills unpaid. Yes, but dreams. I'd been 28, working 2 jobs as a schoolteacher and part-time tutor, while he built his business. Back then, every plan we made began with we. Somewhere along the years, that word turned into I, and I never noticed the exact day it happened. Still, I smiled back that morning, trying to pretend things were fine. Pretending had been my secret talent for decades. "Where we're going?" I asked, setting my cup down. He flashed that salesman grin, the same one that could charm anyone but never quite reached his eyes. "The cruise I've been talking about, Elaine. 7 days, Caribbean. Sun, waves, fresh start. You could use it. A fresh start." The phrase clung to me like the bitter aftertaste of his coffee. For years, I'd begged him to take time off, to slow down, to spend more time with me. He always had excuses, meetings, clients, networking dinners. So when he suddenly booked a cruise, I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe he'd finally realized life wasn't endless. Maybe he was trying. That's what I wanted to believe. But a woman who's been half ignored for 30 years develops a sixth sense, a private radar for lies disguised as kindness. That afternoon, while he went into town to pick up some travel cash, I started packing. The guest room smelled faintly of lavender and dust. I hadn't opened those suitcases since our 20th anniversary trip. As I pulled one out from the closet, I noticed a smaller one beside it. New, glossy, cherry red. Not mine. I unzipped it out of habit more than suspicion. Inside was a silk robe with the tag still on size small. I haven't been a small since Reagan was in office. There was also a bottle of perfume I'd never worn and a printed cruise ticket tucked inside the pocket of a folded blouse. Passenger, Clara Bennett. My name wasn't Clara Bennett. The ticket's departure date matched ours. The cabin number matched ours too. Only one of us, apparently, was supposed to be there. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the silk slipping through my hands like water. The house was quiet, except for the ticking clock and the sound of my own breathing. For a long minute, I couldn't even think. I just stared at the name, letting it burn itself into me. There's a moment in every woman's life when the truth stops whispering and starts screaming. This was mine. I went to my desk and opened the folder where we kept travel documents. My passport. His. Both there. Then I saw something new, a printout labeled Travel Insurance Policy. It was under his name only, listing me as the insured party. The beneficiary line said, "Spouse Richard Turner." My stomach dropped so fast, I thought I'd faint. I read it again, slower this time, my hands trembling so hard the paper rattled. It didn't feel real, like something out of one of those TV movies where the husband plans a tragic accident on vacation. I thought of all the times he'd brushed off my questions about money, all the times he'd insisted I trust him. And I had, because that's what wives of my generation were taught to do. We keep peace. We stay loyal. We hope love returns the favor. When I heard the car pulling into the driveway, I folded the document neatly and slid it back where I found it. My face in the hallway mirror looked calm, almost serene, the same expression I used to wear when the students misbehaved in class. He walked in, carrying a brown paper bag and whistling. "Got us some snacks for the trip," he said, kissing my cheek like nothing had changed. His lips felt cold. "I packed light," I told him. "Just like you said." He smiled, pleased with himself. Good girl. That phrase, good girl, hit me harder than I expected. I'd spent 35 years being his good girl, smiling at dinners, forgiving missed anniversaries, making excuses for his temper, trusting the man who built a kingdom with my patience as his bricks. That night, I lay awake beside him, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. I thought about the cruise, about Clara Bennett, about that insurance policy. Every inhale he took sounded like a countdown. When the clock hit midnight, I whispered into the dark, "You really should have told me to pack heavier, Richard." Because deep down, even then, I knew one thing for sure: he wasn't planning for me to come back from that trip. And I wasn't planning to go quietly. I didn't sleep that night. I lay there listening to the low hum of the ceiling fan and the steady rhythm of his breathing, the sound of a man at peace, because he thought his lies were safe. When dawn came, I got up before him. I made coffee, just like always, and watched the sun rise through the lace curtains. It was a habit, the morning ritual of a woman who spent her whole life serving others before herself. But that morning, even the smell of coffee felt different, bitter in a way I couldn't swallow anymore. For 35 years, I'd kept this house warm, his shirts ironed, his meals hot, his life running. People used to say, "You're lucky, Elaine Richards such a provider." And maybe he was. He provided the mortgage payments, the cars, the business trips, and the expensive silence that came with each one. I used to measure my worth by how steady I kept things. I thought being needed was the same as being loved. When we married, I believed in the story we built. We were two small-town kids with big dreams. I supported him through every failed business attempt, late nights, debt collectors, tears over bounced checks. I taught during the day and graded papers at night, while he talked about the company he'd build one day. When that day finally came, I was proud. I called him my husband, the entrepreneur. He called me the woman who stood by me. But standing by someone only counts if they're still standing next to you. Looking back now, I realize our marriage didn't break. Suddenly it eroded quietly like a shoreline losing sand one wave at a time. It was in the small things. The way he stopped asking how my day was. The way he corrected me in public. The way he looked through me instead of at me. I told myself every couple changes with time. I told myself, love just matures. But love isn't supposed to make you feel invisible. I thought about all the women I'd known: my mother, my grandmother, my friends from church, women who carried their homes on their backs like pack mules and still smiled through it. We were taught to stay, to be kind, to forgive men who mistook our patience for permission. When my mother passed, she left me a small wooden box. Inside was a faded letter she'd written to herself when my father cheated on her. It said, "Some men don't break your heart. They wear it down until you can't feel it anymore." I hadn't understood those words until now. I looked around my kitchen that morning, the one I'd painted myself, the one with curtains I'd sewn from old fabric because we couldn't afford new ones back then. Every inch of that house carried a piece of me. My fingerprints were in its walls, my sacrifices in its floors. And yet, it wasn't really mine. Everything was in his name. I remembered the first time I caught him lying 20 years ago, a conference in Miami that ended up being a week in Cancun with a woman named Stephanie. I found the receipts in his jacket pocket, same as now. He cried, begged, said it meant nothing. I forgave him because I thought forgiveness was strength. Turns out, it was just training him to think I'd always take him back. I made him breakfast that morning anyway. Eggs, toast, bacon, the same way he liked. Old habits die slower than love. When he came down, he looked cheerful, humming to himself, checking something on his phone. Probably her. He kissed my forehead and said, "You really do spoil me. You know that?" I smiled. But inside, I felt something sharp twist like a thread snapping deep inside me. That smile, the one I'd worn for decades, didn't reach my eyes anymore. I realized I'd been living my whole life performing calmness for the comfort of others. Teachers do it in classrooms. Wives do it in kitchens. We smile so we won't scare people with the truth of what's dying inside us. I looked at him and thought, I used to love you enough to die for you. Now I love myself enough not to. When he left for the office, I stood in the doorway watching him go tall, confident, still wearing the same cologne he'd worn since the 90s. I noticed how sure his steps were, how certain he was that I'd always be waiting. That was the part that hurt most, not his betrayal, but his certainty that I'd never fight back. The rest of the day, I walked through my memories like rooms in a house I no longer recognized. The first apartment we rented with no heat. The tiny silver bracelet he bought me when our son was born. The nights I'd stayed awake waiting for headlights in the driveway. Each memory felt like a photograph in a burned album, pieces of a life that looked perfect from far away, but crumbled when you touched it. By evening, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table again, staring at the same papers I'd discovered: the cruise ticket, the insurance policy. But this time, I didn't feel paralyzed. I felt awake. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was clarity. I thought of my mother's letter again and whispered, "You were right." Because now I knew he wasn't just trying to leave me. He'd been preparing to bury me long before the cruise ever set sail. And this time, I wasn't going to be the one left in the dark. By the third day after finding that cruise ticket, my mind had gone from panic to precision. When you've been married as long as I have, you learn how to hide your feelings in plain sight. The trick is to stay calm, move slowly, and let the betrayer think they're still winning. So I made dinner. Not just any dinner, his favorite. Roast chicken, garlic potatoes, collard greens, and that honey cornbread he used to say tasted like home. I wanted everything perfect, not because I cared about pleasing him, but because I wanted him relaxed, comfortable, completely unguarded when I asked the question that had been burning in my throat since I saw the name Clara Bennett. He walked in around 7, smelling like whiskey and expensive lies. "Well now," he said, loosening his tie. "What's the occasion?" I smiled. "Just us," I said softly, "before the trip." He grinned like a man who thought he was still adored. Now that's what I'm talking about. My girl's still got it. That word. Again. My. Like I was another one of his possessions. We ate mostly in silence. The TV murmured from the next room, the soft hum of the evening filling the space between us. I studied him carefully, the lines on his face deeper now, hair silvering around the edges. But his arrogance hadn't aged a day. He talked about the cruise as if he was doing me a favor. 7 days, baby. Just you and me. Open water. No phones. No worries. He looked up and smirked. You need that. You've been so tense lately. I stirred my potatoes slowly. Is that right? He leaned back, sipping his drink. Yeah, you've been on edge. You know, women your age sometimes get anxious over nothing. Hormones, boredom, whatever it is. There it was, that little dagger disguised as concern. The same one he'd used for years to make me doubt my instincts. I used to let it pierce me. That night, I let it slide off like rain on glass. "So," I said, keeping my tone light, "tell me again about the cruise. Where are we going exactly?" He grinned, tapping his fork on the plate. "The itinerary's all handled, sweetheart. First stop's Nassau, then over to Cozumel, then maybe Belize. I've got us set in a suite, the works." Funny thing was, I already knew our supposed itinerary didn't match what was printed on that other ticket. But I wanted to hear him lie. I wanted to see it come out of his mouth, so I'd never second-guess myself again. "And who's Clara Bennett?" I asked casually, cutting my chicken. He froze for a split second, a flicker, barely there. But I caught it. Years of reading students' faces during exams had trained me to recognize guilt in a heartbeat. "Who?" he said too quickly. Then he laughed. "Elaine, where do you get this stuff? You've been watching too many crime shows." "I found a ticket," I said quietly, "with her name on it. Same cruise, Same cabin number. He didn't flinch this time, just leaned back, chuckling. You're unbelievable. You probably printed something wrong. You always get mixed up with the computer. He was good. The man could lie like he was born for it. But his eyes, they were too sharp, too alert. That calm, rehearsed tone was the sound of a man cornered, but pretending not to be. I just want to understand, I said softly. You tell me to pack light, then I find an extra ticket and an insurance policy with my name on it but your signature. What am I supposed to think? He set his fork down. You're supposed to think you're losing it, Elaine. You've been tired. You're imagining things. You always do this, twisting things in your head until you scare yourself. That was his weapon of choice. Not shouting, not hitting, but gaslighting. Slowly erasing my reality until only his version existed. I'd lived under that fog for decades. But tonight, I was clear. I took a sip of water, steadying my hand. Maybe you're right, I said, giving him that old smile, the one that used to melt him. Maybe I do imagine things. His whole body relaxed, mistaking surrender for stupidity. Good. Let's just enjoy dinner, okay? No more drama. He reached for my hand, and I let him take it. His palm was warm, confident, certain that I'd just folded. But inside me, something hard and cold settled into place, the part of me that finally stopped waiting for apologies. I want this trip to be special, he said, squeezing my hand. Let's make it a reset. You know, wipe the slate clean. I nodded slowly. A clean slate, I repeated. That's exactly what I want too. After dinner, I cleared the plates while he poured himself another drink and put on music. He was humming along, completely at ease, while I stood by the sink staring at our reflections in the window. Him relaxed and oblivious, me behind him, expressionless. That's when I knew he no longer saw me as real. I was just background to his story. Later that night, as we got ready for bed, he wrapped an arm around me and said, "You'll thank me for this cruise, sweetheart. You'll see." I smiled into the dark and whispered, "Oh, I already do." Because now I wasn't scared anymore. I had confirmation every word, every lie, every false smile. He thought I was his next easy mark, but I was already planning his last calm dinner. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise again. Richard was still asleep, mouth open slightly, hand resting on his chest, like a man without a worry in the world. For years, I'd looked at that face and felt comfort. Now all I could see were the lies settled in his skin, like lines time forgot to smooth away. I watched him for a moment longer, then slipped out of bed quietly. I'd decided something in the night. I wasn't going to confront him again. Not until I had proof. Hard. Undeniable. Put him in handcuffs. Proof. I poured myself coffee and sat at the dining table with my laptop, my old reading glasses perched at the edge of my nose. I typed the cruise line's name from the ticket Ocean Horizon Voyages. Their website came up. Bright blues and smiling couples on decks, champagne in hand. I clicked Manage Booking and entered the confirmation number I'd seen on the printout. It loaded. 2 passengers listed, Richard Turner and Clara Bennett. Suite 5147, honeymoon package, romantic celebration rate. My name wasn't anywhere on that page. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen, letting the reality settle like cold steel in my stomach. He hadn't even bothered to change the name of the cabin. He'd replaced me entirely, officially, financially. Then I clicked deeper. The package details showed spousal insurance protection included. It linked to a travel insurance company I didn't recognize, one that apparently had received several recent deposits from our joint account. Deposits I hadn't approved. I opened our bank portal next. I hadn't logged in for months. He handled all the bills now, but I still remembered the passwords. Women like me never forget things. We just stop being asked to remember. When the account opened, my heart sank. The savings account that once held our retirement fund nearly $200,000 had been drained. Another account, in his name only, had appeared in its place. Every transaction was clean, calculated, months in the making. Transfers disguised as business expenses, as donations, even as maintenance work. And there it was, the payment for the cruise, 2 suite tickets purchased with my savings. I scrolled further down and froze when I saw the insurance entry again. Life policy beneficiary, Richard Turner. Amount, $1.2 million. Status, active. The date it was filed, 2 weeks ago. That was when my hands started shaking. I thought of all those true crime stories I used to hear about wives who fell overboard, missing spouses lost accidentally at sea. I used to pity those women. Now I realized they might have all heard the same line I did. Pack light, honey. I closed the laptop and sat there in the silence. My heart was pounding, but my thoughts were suddenly clear, frighteningly clear. He didn't just want to leave me. He wanted to erase me. I needed someone who could help without tipping him off. The only person who came to mind was Marcus Hale, one of my former students, now a detective with the State Fraud Division. He'd written me a thank you letter years ago after I helped him finish high school. I still had it, tucked in my desk. I called his office line, half hoping he wouldn't remember me. But when he picked up, his voice lit with recognition. "Mrs. Turner? My God, it's been years. How are you?" "I've been better, Marcus," I said, my tone even. "I think I may have something you'd want to see. Financial irregularities, maybe fraud. I'm not sure how deep yet." He paused. "You think someone's using your identity?" I hesitated. "No," I said finally. "I think it's someone using my marriage." He told me to bring copies of everything I had: tickets, account records, any document that looked suspicious. We agreed to meet quietly the next day at a diner just outside town. That night, I went through every drawer, every file cabinet. Richard had always kept a business folder locked in his desk. He didn't know I'd watched him punch in the code a dozen times over the years. I waited until he fell asleep, then slipped into his office. The faint blue glow from the aquarium tank cast shifting light across the room. I opened the drawer. Inside, everything was neat, too neat. Contracts, bank statements, even blank signature sheets with my name traced faintly at the bottom. My hand trembled as I picked one up. The signature looked perfect. Only it wasn't mine. He'd been practicing. I sat there staring at it, the quiet hum of the aquarium filter the only sound. That's when the anger stopped being pain. It became something colder, controlled, purposeful. I wasn't the helpless wife anymore. I was the witness. I gathered the documents, scanned them onto a flash drive, and put everything back exactly where I found it. By the time I returned to bed, he stirred and mumbled, "You okay, babe?" "Yes," I whispered. "Just couldn't sleep." He rolled over and kissed my shoulder. "Don't overthink everything. You'll ruin the trip before it starts." I smiled into the dark. "You're right," I said softly. "The trip will be unforgettable." Because by then, I already knew exactly how it would end, and it wouldn't be with me overboard. It would be with him in handcuffs. By morning, I felt like a woman possessed by focus. Not anger that had cooled overnight, but purpose. I didn't cry anymore. I didn't tremble. I just moved. Slowly, quietly, deliberately. I packed my tote bag with copies of the cruise tickets, the insurance policy, and the forged documents I'd scanned to the flash drive. Every paper felt like a piece of my marriage unraveling, but I folded them neatly anyway. After 35 years of making things tidy, I wasn't about to stop now, not even with the truth. Richard left the house around 10, whistling as he always did when he thought life was bending his way. He kissed my cheek and said, "Don't overpack, sweetheart. Remember what I said, light and easy." "I'll remember," I replied. I watched his car disappear down the street. Then I grabbed my keys and drove. The diner Marcus had chosen sat off a quiet highway, the kind of place with peeling paint and perfect coffee. He was already there, sitting in a corner booth, broader and older than I remembered, grey flecks in his beard, but the same kind eyes. "Mrs. Turner," he said, standing to hug me. "Or do I call you Elaine now?" "Elaine's fine," I said. "Feels strange to hear Mrs. these days." He smiled gently. "Let's see what you've got." I slid the folder across the table. He took his time looking through the papers, no interruptions, just small nods and the occasional low whistle. When he reached the forged signature, he tapped the page. "This right here," he said, "is a felony on its own. If these are connected to insurance or asset transfers, we're talking serious charges." "I figured as much," I said quietly. "Does he know you found this?" "Not yet. He thinks I'm still packing for our lovely little cruise." Marcus exhaled, shaking his head. "I'll be honest with you, Elaine. This isn't just infidelity or theft. This looks like premeditated fraud, maybe even attempted insurance homicide, if they can prove intent." The words hung between us. Insurance homicide. I didn't flinch, but I felt a shiver run through me anyway. He leaned closer. "You need to protect yourself, financially and physically. I'll get this into the right hands. The FBI has a unit that tracks fraud rings tied to travel scams. If he's involved in one, we'll know soon enough." "Fraud rings?" I repeated. He nodded. "There've been cases lately, couples taking out fake policies, disappearing spouses, identity thefts tied to cruise lines, organized stuff, not just one man playing games." It hit me then. Maybe Richard wasn't just a liar. Maybe he'd stepped into something bigger, darker, and he'd used my name as his shield. Marcus slid me a card. "Don't confront him again. Don't let on that you know. Let him take that trip if he wants. We'll be watching." I nodded slowly. That's exactly what I planned to do. Before I left, he placed a reassuring hand over mine. "You did the right thing, Elaine. Most people don't come forward until it's too late." "I've spent 35 years being too late," I said, my voice steady. "That ends now." Back home, I moved with the kind of calm that scares people who finally made up their minds. I made lists, printed bank records, copied the cruise itinerary, the insurance confirmation, and my will. Yes, my will. I didn't want him to use it as his next document to forge. Then I called our bank directly. After answering the security questions, I said, "This is Elaine Turner. I want to freeze any accounts that bear my signature." The woman on the line hesitated. "But ma'am, your husband—" "My husband doesn't speak for me anymore." By the end of that call, every joint account was locked, every credit line flagged. I changed the passwords, set up new alerts, and had my mail redirected to a PO box. For the first time in years, I was in control of my own name. Richard came home that evening, humming, holding a folder. "Everything's confirmed," he said cheerfully. "They upgraded our cabin, told you I had friends in high places." "Oh, I bet you do," I murmured. He didn't notice the edge in my tone. He never did. I asked him about packing, acting every bit the dutiful wife. "You'll take care of the documents," I said sweetly. "Already done," he replied, patting the folder. "All the boring paperwork handled. You just bring your pretty self." He winked, kissed my temple, and went upstairs to shower. The sound of the water running masked the sound of me quietly dialing Marcus's number. "He's confirmed the trip," I said. "They're leaving on schedule." Marcus's voice on the other end was calm. "Good. Let him go. We'll have agents waiting at the dock when the ship returns. Don't cancel. Don't resist. You stay safe, Elaine. And don't tell a soul." After hanging up, I stood by the window, watching the last pink traces of sunset fade behind the trees. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for him to come home. I was waiting for justice to catch up. I felt something powerful inside me. Not revenge exactly, but restoration. Like finding an old photograph and realizing the woman in it still existed. I looked at my reflection in the glass. silver hair catching the last light, face lined but steady, eyes clear. I whispered to myself, "You're not just surviving this, Elaine, you're rewriting it." And for the first time in decades, the woman staring back didn't look afraid. The morning they left for the cruise, the sky was the color of steel. Even the birds outside seemed quieter, like the world itself was holding its breath. Richard was up early, dressed in one of his crisp linen shirts, humming as he rolled his suitcase down the hall. I watched him move, confident, sure, the picture of a man who believed he'd won. "Don't forget your hat," I said softly, handing him the one he always wore on vacations. He smiled, kissed my cheek. "What would I do without you?" I almost laughed. "You're about to find out." He didn't notice the envelope on the corner of the table, the one addressed to my attorney, sealed and time-stamped, containing every piece of evidence Marcus had me sign the night before. Marcus had already filed copies with federal investigators. The case was officially in motion. All that was left was to let Richard walk himself into it. "I still can't believe you're not coming," he said, checking his watch. "You sure you're feeling okay?" I nodded, playing my part. "I've been queasy all week. Maybe it's the nerves. I'll stay, rest a bit, and join you later." He smirked. "That's my girl, always so cautious." He meant it as a jab. I took it as a compliment. When he stepped out to load the car, I followed to the porch. That's when I saw her. Clara Bennett. Younger, maybe early 40s. Pretty in a forgettable way. Expensive hair, new luggage, a face rehearsing sweetness, but showing hunger. She waved politely like I was his aunt instead of his wife. "Good morning, Mrs. Turner," she said, voice too bright. "Thank you for letting Richard borrow you for so long." I smiled, just as bright. "Oh, don't thank me yet. He's all yours now." Richard chuckled, thinking I was being charming, but my eyes stayed on Clara's. And for the briefest moment, she faltered, like she'd caught a glimpse of something she didn't understand yet. They loaded their bags, hers first, of course. His hand brushed her shoulder in a way that would have broken me years ago. Now it only confirmed everything I needed to know, that their arrogance was my greatest weapon. He waved from the driver's seat. "Wish us luck." "I already did," I said. The car disappeared down the road, the taillights shrinking until they were just two red dots swallowed by the morning fog. When the silence returned, I sat on the porch steps, letting the chill bite through my robe. My hands were steady. My heart wasn't racing. That surprised me. I expected anger, or sorrow, or even triumph. But all I felt was a quiet, grounded peace, the kind that comes when you finally stop pretending not to see. At noon, I called Marcus. "They're on their way," I said. "Good," he replied. "Everything's filed. Their ship leaves from Miami, right?" "Yes." "There'll be a federal presence when it docks. Until then, stay off the radar. He can't touch your accounts now, and he has no legal access to your property." "Thank you, Marcus," I said. He hesitated. "Elaine, I've handled a lot of cases, but I've never seen someone as composed as you about this." I smiled faintly. "That's because I already grieved this marriage years ago. I'm just burying the paperwork now." That evening, I opened a bottle of wine, the one he'd bought for our anniversary 2 years ago, the one we never drank because he'd forgotten to come home. I poured one glass, sat by the window, and watched the sky turn orange over the lake behind our house. Somewhere out there, the ship was cutting through open water, champagne corks popping, music playing. I could almost see them standing at the railing, him whispering promises, her laughing like she'd won a prize. He didn't know that while he was drinking overpriced cocktails, the FBI was tracing every offshore transfer, every false signature, every fraudulent insurance form tied to my name. Justice doesn't always wear a badge in a courtroom. Sometimes it wears patience. 3 days later, I got a call from Marcus. "They're still at sea," he said, "but the case has escalated. Turns out your husband's company is tied to 3 other fraudulent insurance claims." Same pattern, older spouse, sudden disappearance, cruise cover story. My breath caught. So I wasn't the first. No, he said grimly, but you might be the last, because now we've got a trail. I hung up and walked outside. The wind had picked up, rustling through the trees. For a second, I closed my eyes and imagined him out there pacing, lying, laughing, oblivious to the fact that his empire was sinking faster than any ship could. I whispered, "Bon voyage, Richard." Then I added softly, "And may the truth meet you at the dock." The next morning, I woke to the news alert. Businessman and companion arrested on cruise fraud investigation. Their photos were right there, Richard in handcuffs, looking bewildered and furious, and Clara beside him, crying, mascara running like ink. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then, without meaning to, I started to laugh. Not out of cruelty, but out of something deeper: relief, disbelief, freedom. 35 years of pretending, and it all ended with one simple act, seeing the truth for what it was and trusting myself to act. I poured myself another cup of coffee and whispered, "You told me to pack light, Richard." I smiled to myself, and I did, because all I carried now was peace. The news broke on a Tuesday morning. Businessman Richard Turner arrested in multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. The photo showed him in handcuffs, head down, the charm wiped clean from his face. Beside him stood Clara Bennett, tear-streaked, humiliated, and suddenly ordinary. I sat at my kitchen table, coffee growing cold, watching the footage loop. For a long moment I felt nothing, not joy, not anger, just quiet. After 35 years of surviving him, silence felt like the only language left. Marcus called that evening. "It's over, Elaine. The Bureau's got him. The accounts, the forged signatures, the fake policy, it's airtight. You did everything right." I thanked him, but my voice sounded far away. Maybe because part of me still couldn't believe it. You spend decades standing in someone's shadow. Even justice feels strange in the sunlight. My son, Daniel, called next. We hadn't spoken much since Richard turned him against me, convincing him I was losing it. But now his voice trembled with guilt. "Mum," he said, "I saw the news. I didn't believe him, not really, but I didn't believe you either. I'm sorry." I closed my eyes. "You don't need to be sorry, baby. You needed to learn the truth your own way. So did I." He hesitated. "What'll you do now?" I looked around the quiet house that had once echoed with lies. "Live," I said simply. "Finally live." Weeks passed. Reporters moved on. The investigation wrapped. And the house that once held my silence went on the market. I sold it and bought a smaller place near the lake, a white cottage with peeling paint and sunlight that slipped through every window. The first morning I woke there, I brewed coffee and watched the water shimmer gold. No shouting, no footsteps, no pretending. People asked if I was lonely. I told them no. You can't be lonely once you start liking your own company. Letters began to arrive from women who'd read about my case, thanking me for speaking up, for proving it's never too late to see the truth. I kept them in a wooden box, the same one my mother left me. Sometimes, on quiet afternoons, I'd read them out loud to the empty room. It made the silence feel purposeful. Daniel started visiting again, repairing the porch rail, bringing groceries, staying for long talks that ran past sunset. One night he said, "You always said storms leave things cleaner." I smiled. "And now the air's clean." Months later, Marcus called with one last update. He's been sentenced 15 years, no parole. I didn't cry, didn't celebrate, just walked outside and let the breeze touch my face. For once, peace didn't feel like waiting. It felt like freedom. That weekend I booked a cruise. Same route, different ship, just me. As the ship pulled away from the dock, I stood at the railing, wind in my hair, sea stretching endless before me. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I heard his voice again. "Pack light, honey." He was right. I didn't need much. Just peace. I watched the horizon glowing pink and whispered to myself. He told me to pack light. I did. I left behind everything that ever made me small.